Hello, dear viewers of my video. I hope you enjoy watching it and look forward to your feedback in the comments. I was still wearing the black dress from the funeral when I heard the words that would end my career. Your position has been eliminated. The sentence landed in the room like a stone in water, spreading silence in perfect circles until there was nothing but the hum of the air conditioner and the faint tap of my own shoes against the carpet. I had expected a conversation, maybe even a pretense of empathy, but the HR manager delivered the phrase with all the warmth of a voicemail reminder. No eye contact, no apology, just a printed letter slid across the desk. It was almost poetic in the cruelest way that this happened on the same day I had buried the only person in the company who had ever believed in me. Margaret, my mentor, my ally, my protector against the sharp-edged politics of the executive floor, was gone. Only hours earlier, I had stood at her graveside, clutching a damp tissue, pretending to listen to the priest, while all I could think was that without her, I was defenseless. And now, sitting across from HR, I realized how quickly the knives had come out. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't even blink. Because while they thought they were erasing me from the company ledger, I knew something they didn't. Margaret hadn't left me with kind words or trinkets to remember her by. She had entrusted me with something infinitely more dangerous, a client portfolio worth $5 million in annual contracts. No one else knew, not the directors, not the partners, not even HR sitting smugly across from me. Margaret had slipped the files into my possession 2 weeks before her sudden illness, almost as if she had sensed what was coming. "You'll know what to do with these," she had whispered, her voice thin from the chemo treatments. I didn't ask questions, I just nodded. Because when Margaret handed you something, you accepted it like gospel. The paper in front of me was nothing more than a formality. In light of restructuring, operational redundancy, effective immediately, I signed my name with a steady hand, slid the pen back across the table, and thanked them for their time. The HR manager looked almost disappointed that I didn't beg or protest. I suppose they had been expecting a performance, maybe even a tearful scene they could whisper about later. Instead, I stood, adjusted the strap of my handbag, and walked toward the glass doors with the kind of composure I didn't even know I still had. When I stepped back into the main office, every pair of eyes turned toward me. Some were curious, others gleeful. A few carried that sick satisfaction people get when they watch someone else's life unravel. I could hear whispers already forming, the unspoken question of whether I had been caught doing something wrong, whether I had finally failed in a way they had always secretly hoped I would. I didn't give them the satisfaction of a reaction. I simply smiled, a faint, almost polite curve of the lips, and walked past their desks like a guest leaving a party that had gone stale hours ago. I could feel their stares burning into my back as I pushed through the exit, but not one of them dared to stop me. Outside, the city was loud, alive, oblivious. I let the door close behind me and breathed air that felt sharper, colder than it had that morning. It hit me then that I was free, but also in possession of something that made freedom dangerous. Because those $5 million in contracts weren't just paper. They were relationships, trust, promises Margaret had cultivated and then quietly transferred into my hands. And the executives inside that building had no idea they existed. As I walked down the sidewalk, I realized something that almost made me laugh. They thought they had fired me, but in reality, I was the only one walking away with the company's most valuable asset. And that was when the inevitable began. 6 months ago, Margaret called me into her office late on a Tuesday evening. The office was nearly empty by then, with most of the staff already gone. The hum of the fluorescent lights above her desk filled the silence, and I could see that she had locked the door behind me. Margaret wasn't the kind of woman who locked doors unless something serious was about to be said. "Sit down, Lila," she said softly. Almost too softly for the sharp, commanding woman I had known for years. She looked pale, her skin pulled tighter across her cheekbones, and for the first time, I noticed how much weight she had lost. Her hand trembled slightly as she pushed a folder across the desk toward me. I sat, feeling my heart race. "What's going on?" I asked. She leaned back in her chair, exhaling heavily, like she'd been holding this moment in for weeks. "I don't have much time left. The doctors confirmed last week that it's terminal. 6 months, maybe less." The words knocked the air out of me. Margaret had always been larger than life to me, sharp-witted, unshakable, the one person who could go toe-to-toe with the executives and leave them speechless. Hearing her speak about her own death felt impossible. I swallowed hard, trying to process what she was saying. "Margaret? No. There must be something." She lifted her hand to stop me. "I don't need comfort, Lila. I need you to listen, because what I'm about to tell you matters more than anything else in your career." I nodded, trying to steady myself. "Inside that folder," she continued, "are the first of my key client transfers. Officially, it looks like I'm assigning you as the point of contact to help me with workload, but every document is drawn up legally with my signature, transferring full authority of those accounts to you." I froze, staring at the folder like it was something radioactive. Slowly, I opened it. Inside were contracts, neatly organized with sticky notes and highlights, each naming me as the new responsible manager. My name, my signature line, my authority. "Why? Why are you doing this?" I whispered. "Because I trust you," she said firmly. "Because I've built this company's client base from nothing, and I refuse to hand it over to those vultures upstairs. When I'm gone, they'll carve up my accounts, treat my clients like numbers, and bleed them dry until they leave. I won't let that happen. You're the only one I know who cares enough to protect them." I shook my head in disbelief. "But Margaret, if they find out—" "They won't," she interrupted sharply. "We'll make this clean. Every step will look ordinary. You'll attend meetings with me, answer calls when I'm too busy, draft follow-ups under my supervision. In the system, it looks like support. On paper, it becomes succession. Do you understand?" I nodded slowly, though my stomach twisted. You're giving me your portfolio?" "All of it," she confirmed. $5 million in annual contracts. The backbone of this firm." The weight of her words pressed down on me. I had worked for years to build trust with clients, but Margaret's accounts were on another level entirely. Prestigious, long-term, the kind of names that made or broke careers. And she was just handing them to me. "I don't know if I can—" "You can." She cut me off again, her voice firmer now, the Margaret I knew surfacing for a moment. "I've watched you for years. You're smarter than you give yourself credit for, and you have something the executives here will never understand. Loyalty. You don't see clients as numbers. That's why they'll stay with you. That's why I'm doing this." I sat in silence, flipping through the documents, my hands trembling, as I saw my name again and again in places where hers used to be. Finally, I looked up. "What happens when you're gone?" Her eyes softened, and for a brief moment, I saw not the fierce executive, but the tired woman underneath. That's when the real struggle begins. The moment I'm buried, the company will descend like vultures. They'll restructure, they'll reassign, and they'll try to erase me. And you— She paused, locking eyes with me. "You'll be their next target. They'll underestimate you at first. They'll think you're weak. That's your advantage. But once they realize what you have, they'll come for you." The words chilled me. "What do I do then?" "You do exactly what I've taught you. You keep quiet. You let them underestimate you. And when the time is right, you use what I'm giving you, not for revenge, not for ego, for survival." I wanted to cry, to tell her I didn't want any of this if it meant losing her. But Margaret hated tears. So instead, I straightened my back and nodded. "I'll protect it. I promise." She smiled faintly, the corners of her lips twitching upward. "That's why I chose you." For the next 6 months, we carried out her plan in plain sight. To everyone else, I was simply assisting her, answering calls when she was in treatment, drafting reports under her supervision, attending meetings as her shadow. No one questioned it, because Margaret always had a way of making everything look natural. She signed every document transferring authority to me. She ensured each client had my number saved in their phones, telling them, "If you can't reach me, call Leela. She knows your business as well as I do." And little by little, the balance shifted. What looked like ordinary help on the surface was, in reality, a clean legal transfer of her empire. The last time we spoke before she went into the hospital for good, she looked frail, her voice weaker than I'd ever heard it. But her eyes were sharp, steady, unflinching. "Remember, Lila," she whispered, "they'll think they've won when they push you out. They'll think you're powerless, but you'll know the truth. You'll have what they want. That's when everything will change." I squeezed her hand, fighting the lump in my throat. "I'll be ready," she smiled, almost proudly. "Good girl." That night, as I left the hospital, the weight of her words pressed on me more than ever. I wasn't just inheriting clients. I was inheriting a war. And Margaret was right. The moment she was gone, the vultures would circle. But what they didn't know was that she had already armed me with the only weapon that mattered. The first time I called Vernon Hutchins, I was shaking so badly I had to steady my hand on the desk before dialing. He was one of Margaret's most important clients, the kind of man who could make or break reputations in the industry. I'd spoken to him before, but only in Margaret's presence, always as her assistant, her shadow, never as the main voice on the line. "Mr. Hutchins?" I asked when he picked up, my voice quieter than I intended. "Lila?" he replied, sounding surprised but not displeased. "Where's Margaret?" "She's unavailable this week," I said carefully, using the phrasing Margaret had coached me on. "She asked me to follow up on the supply projections we discussed last month. She mentioned you had concerns about your distribution timelines." There was a pause, long enough for my pulse to quicken. Then he exhaled. "You know about that?" "Yes," I said, flipping through Margaret's notes, though I already knew the details by heart. "You've been facing delays with your Midwest routes. We have a few alternative carriers who can step in immediately. Margaret wanted me to make sure you didn't lose another week waiting." For the next 20 minutes, Vernon spoke more freely than he ever had before, explaining his frustrations, his financial constraints, even small personal details, like how his wife had been pressuring him to cut stress before his heart condition worsened. I listened carefully, making notes the way Margaret taught me, repeating his concerns back in his own words. When the call ended, Vernon said something that both terrified and thrilled me. "You're easier to talk to than Margaret sometimes. Don't let her know I said that." I hung up, staring at the phone, realizing what Margaret had meant all along. The transition didn't happen in the contracts first. It happened in the conversations. Over the following weeks, I repeated that process with every one of Margaret's clients. With Constance Farrow, who ran a textile firm, I made sure to ask about her daughter's graduation before ever mentioning quarterly orders. When Elliot Marr, the brusque CEO of a packaging company, barked at me about missed deadlines, I stayed calm, asking questions until I discovered the real problem wasn't our deliveries, but his own warehouse mismanagement. He didn't admit it outright, but the silence on the line told me I'd hit the truth. Each call was more than business. It was trust building, brick by brick, layer by layer, until one day I realized they weren't calling Margaret anymore. They were calling me directly. From the outside, it still looked like I was just covering for her during treatment, a temporary backup, a diligent assistant. But in reality, I was becoming the main contact person for millions of dollars worth of business relationships, and no one inside the company seemed to notice. Except my colleagues. The gossip began small, whispered in break rooms, exchanged in side glances when I passed. "Why does Margaret always have Lila in her meetings? She's just an assistant, right? What's she doing sitting with the clients? I heard she's been signing things. Can assistants even do that?" I pretended not to hear. I smiled when I walked past them, even when their whispers stopped mid-sentence and their eyes flicked away guiltily. But I heard every word. What they didn't understand was that nothing I did was hidden. Every document was handled openly through Margaret's personal lawyer, a quiet, meticulous man named Dalton Reeves. Dalton drafted the paperwork with precision, ensuring every transfer was legal, every signature authentic. When I signed as the responsible contact, it was all above board. If anyone had bothered to look closely, they'd see Margaret's name authorizing every step. But of course, they didn't look at the documents. They just looked at me. The first time my direct boss confronted me was 2 months into the transition. He called me into his office, shutting the door with a little more force than necessary. "What exactly are you doing with Margaret's accounts?" I kept my expression calm, though my palms were damp. "I'm helping her manage them while she's undergoing treatment. She asked me to handle follow-ups and client calls." He leaned forward across his desk. "Funny. Clients are mentioning you by name, not Margaret. You're showing up in reports. You're even copied on emails directly. Doesn't that sound a little unusual for an assistant?" I tilted my head, feigning mild confusion. "I'm not acting outside her instructions. Every step I take is under her approval. If you'd like, I can bring you the signed delegation forms from her lawyer." His eyes flickered. He hadn't expected that. "That won't be necessary," he muttered, leaning back in his chair. "Just keep in mind your position here, Lila." "Don't overstep," I nodded obediently, but inside, my chest was burning. He suspected. He sensed the shift, but he had no evidence, and Margaret had planned for that. As the months passed, the gossip grew uglier. I heard whispers of favoritism, of manipulation, even rumors that I was using Margaret's illness for my own advantage. None of it surprised me. People in that office had always hated when anyone rose too quickly. And from their perspective, I was rising too fast, moving into circles I didn't belong in. But every time I doubted myself, Margaret's words replayed in my head. "They'll underestimate you. That's your advantage." So I let them gossip. I smiled through the suspicion. And I kept answering my clients' calls, listening to their frustrations, solving their problems, building a foundation no rumor could touch. One evening, Margaret and I sat in her office, the sun setting through the glass behind her, paperwork spread across her desk. She looked tired, her shoulders thinner, her hands frailer than they had been 6 months ago. But her eyes still carried that steel I had always admired. "You're doing well," she said quietly, flipping through the contracts Dalton had delivered. "Better than I expected." "I feel like everyone's watching me," I admitted, "like they're waiting for me to fail." "They are," she said without hesitation. "And that's why you won't give them the satisfaction." "Listen to me carefully, Lila. The gossip, the suspicion, even the jealousy, those are signs you're becoming a threat. And threats get noticed," I swallowed. "And when they notice too much?" Her lips curved into a tired smile. "That's when they'll make their move. But by then, it will be too late. You'll already have everything they want, and nothing they can take from you will matter anymore." I nodded, though the weight of her words pressed hard against my chest. The next morning, when I walked through the office, the whispers followed me again. But this time, I didn't shrink under them. I straightened my shoulders, carried myself like someone who belonged there, and let them look. Because they didn't know the truth. They didn't know that Margaret's empire was already in my hands. One signature, one conversation, one carefully planned step at a time. And they didn't know that every move they made to undermine me only proved Margaret right. The struggle hadn't even begun yet. But when it did, I would be ready. The day after I walked out of the office for the last time, I opened a bank account in my own name. Not for my personal savings, but for the beginnings of something larger. By noon, I was standing inside a cramped government office, signing papers with a shaking hand. "Business name?" the clerk asked flatly, not looking up from her computer. "Veridi Consulting," I said, the name Margaret had suggested in one of our last conversations. She had chosen it carefully, knowing it sounded neutral enough to pass without questions, yet strong enough to command respect. Within 48 hours, I had what the company never expected me to have: a registered firm of my own. The office I rented was nothing like the glass-walled spaces of the company I had left. It was a single room above a bakery, with peeling paint on the walls and a smell of yeast and cinnamon seeping in through the vents. But when I set my laptop on the second-hand desk and pushed a chair into place, I felt something I had never felt in all my years at the old firm: freedom. For the first time, the clients I spoke to weren't Margaret's or the company's. They were mine, and the calls began almost immediately. "Lila," Vernon said when I answered the phone on my first morning, "I heard about Margaret. I also heard about you," leaving his voice lowered. "They tried to contact me this week, but I told them no. You're the only one who ever listened. I'll keep my business with you." Constance echoed the same sentiment in her precise, careful way. "The new manager they sent me didn't even know my daughter had graduated." He didn't ask. He just pushed numbers. "I don't want that. I want you, one by one." The clients chose me. Not because I had begged, not because I had undercut contracts, but because trust cannot be transferred with a signature. It has to be earned. And Margaret had known that all along. The first call from the company's lawyers came a week later. "This is Anthony Green, legal counsel for Braxton and Hale, representing your former employer." The man's tone was sharp, the kind used to frighten people into submission. "You are in possession of proprietary client relationships that belong exclusively to the company. Failure to comply will result in immediate legal action." I listened in silence until he paused. Then I answered in the calmest voice I could manage. "Mr. Green, all contracts were legally transferred through Margaret's personal lawyer. If you believe otherwise, I suggest you direct your claims to him." He sputtered for a moment, clearly not expecting me to stand so firm. "This could get ugly for you, Ms. Lila. You're young. You don't understand how expensive these battles become. We're willing to offer an alternative arrangement." "An arrangement?" "A consulting agreement. You keep the clients for now, but under the company's umbrella. We'll pay you a fee to act as liaison. It will look better for everyone involved." I almost laughed. They thought I could be bought back into the same system I had just escaped. "I'll decline," I said simply. "My lawyer will expect your paperwork, if you have any." Then I hung up before he could finish his threat. 2 days later, I was sitting in my little office when a knock sounded at the door. It was Evelyn, a colleague from my old department. She looked nervous, her eyes darting down the hallway before she stepped inside. "Close the door," she whispered. I did, motioning for her to sit. "What's going on?" She leaned across the desk, lowering her voice. "They're coming after you, Lila." "Harder than you think. Management has been holding meetings every morning about you. They're digging through your records, your emails, even your expense reports, looking for something to discredit you." My stomach tightened, but I kept my face steady. "What kind of things?" "Anything. They've already started spreading rumors that you tricked Margaret into transferring her clients while she was sick. They're telling people you manipulated her, that you took advantage of her condition." I felt heat rising up my neck. "That's a lie." "I know it is," Evelyn said quickly, "but they don't care about truth. They just need to plant enough doubt. And it gets worse. They froze Margaret's family payments last week. Her pension, her benefits, even the settlement her husband was promised. They told finance to review the disbursements. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Margaret was barely in the ground, and they were already cutting off the family she left behind. "They want to show they own everything," Evelyn whispered, "that even her death belongs to them." I clenched my fists, the anger hot and raw in my chest. Up until then, I had been fighting for myself, for survival, for the empire Margaret had entrusted to me. But hearing this, I realized the truth. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about her legacy. That night, I sat alone in my little office, long after the bakery downstairs had closed, the smell of bread gone cold in the air. I thought of Margaret, the sharp lines of her face, the way her eyes lit up when she spoke about protecting clients, the strength she carried even as her body failed. She had warned me this would happen. She had told me the vultures would circle, but I hadn't expected them to strike so viciously, so quickly, even against her family. I pulled the stack of contracts from my desk drawer, the ones Dalton had prepared, each signed with Margaret's unmistakable handwriting. I ran my fingers over the paper, steadying myself. "They think they can erase you," I whispered into the quiet room. "But I won't let them." The next morning, when Anthony Green called again, his tone more aggressive than before, I was ready. "You're making a mistake, Ms. Lila. You're a young woman with no resources, no support. This firm will crush you in litigation. Settle now, and you might salvage your career," I interrupted him, my voice firm and cold. "Mr. Green, let me make this very clear. Every document is airtight. Every transfer was signed under legal supervision. Every client relationship is mine by choice, not by theft. If you want to challenge that, speak to my lawyer. But if you call me again, I will consider it harassment." And for the first time, I heard hesitation in his voice. Later that day, I received another call, this time from Vernon. "They sent someone to me," he said, his tone sharp with anger. "Tried to convince me you were unstable, that you manipulated Margaret." "Do they think I'm an idiot? I told them if they contacted me again, I'd pull my other accounts too." One by one, the clients stood their ground, not because I asked them to, but because loyalty cannot be fabricated in a boardroom. It's built in the small details, in remembering a daughter's graduation, a wife's illness, a personal fear whispered during a late-night call. Margaret had known that. I had learned it from her. And now it was saving me. When Evelyn stopped by again a week later, she looked both nervous and relieved. "They're furious, Lila. The executives can't understand why the clients won't return. They're blaming each other, but they're also doubling down. They've assigned a team specifically to ruin your reputation. They've even started leaking false stories to industry contacts," I exhaled slowly, the anger in me solidifying into something sharper, colder. "Then we fight," I said. Evelyn looked at me carefully. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" "They'll stop at nothing," I met her gaze without flinching. "They made a mistake when they went after Margaret's family. This isn't just business anymore. This is war, and I don't lose wars that aren't mine alone." That night, for the first time, I didn't cry when I thought of Margaret. Instead, I felt her presence like steel in my spine, steadying me. I wasn't just protecting contracts. I was defending her name, her legacy, her empire. And I would burn the company to the ground before I let them take that from us. The attacks came harder after my clients refused to leave me. The company had always operated like a predator, circling, intimidating, waiting for weakness. But when intimidation failed, they grew reckless. Rumors turned into thinly veiled threats. Anonymous calls came late at night. A few clients even confessed they had been offered secret incentives to abandon me. That was when I realized I couldn't stand alone anymore. Margaret had prepared me for this, but she had also told me once, "You can't win a war without allies." I knew exactly who to call. Her name was Aria Linton, Margaret's former partner from the early days of the firm. She had left years ago after clashing with management over ethics, quietly building her own advisory practice in another city. Margaret had spoken of her often, always with a mixture of admiration and regret. "Aria has what I don't," she had once told me. "She doesn't compromise." Not ever. That's why they hated her. And that's why she survived. When I dialed Aria's number, my hands trembled. I hadn't spoken to her before, but I knew this was my only chance. "Aria Linton speaking," came the crisp voice on the line. "Aria," I began, forcing myself to sound steady. "My name is Lila. I was Margaret's protégé. She's gone now, but before she died, she transferred her clients to me. I think she wanted me to reach out to you when the time came." There was silence, then a long breath. Margaret always planned 3 moves ahead. What's happening? I explained everything. The client transfers, the company's harassment, the legal threats, the smear campaign, even the freeze on Margaret's family payments. My voice cracked only once, but Arya didn't interrupt. She listened the way Margaret used to, fully, sharply, without judgment. When I finished, she spoke with quiet authority. "I'll be there tomorrow." Arya arrived like a storm. She walked into my small bakery office in a dark suit, her presence so commanding, the walls seemed too small to contain her. She shook my hand firmly and sat down across from me, opening a leather briefcase packed with files. "So, first, we stabilize," she said. "We reassure every client. We show them not only that you're reliable, but that you're growing their business beyond anything the old firm ever offered." With her guidance, I transformed my operation from a stopgap into a strategy house. Together, we developed tailored growth plans for each client, new markets for Vernon's manufacturing, supply chain optimization for Constance's textiles, digital expansion for Elliot's packaging business. The clients didn't just stay, they flourished. And every time they signed new deals with me, the old company bled a little more. The executives panicked. Their calls became frantic. Their lawyers' threats grew louder but thinner, like glass ready to shatter. Then, one morning, I received the offer that told me they were at the end of their rope. A letter on heavy company letterhead, hand-delivered by courier. Proposal, partnership, and management appointment. The letter offered me a seat at the table I had once been excluded from. A partnership, a place in senior management, a salary beyond anything I'd imagined. All they wanted in return was simple: my client portfolio. I read the words 3 times, then laughed bitterly. This wasn't generosity, it was desperation. They had lost their clients, their influence, their grip, and now they were trying to buy back what Margaret had already taken from them. Arya read the letter over my shoulder and shook her head. This is their last card. Don't play it. End the game instead. That afternoon, I walked into Dalton's office, Margaret's lawyer, the man who had quietly secured every client transfer months earlier. He rose when he saw me, his sharp eyes flicking to the folder in my hands. "I think it's time," I said, setting it on his desk. Inside was everything Margaret had collected over the years. Documents, contracts, internal memos, even recordings. Evidence of fraud, tax evasion, false reporting to investors. She had been gathering it, quietly, piece by piece, waiting for the right moment. Dalton's expression didn't change, but his voice grew heavier. "You understand what this will trigger?" "Yes," I said. "An investigation. One they can't silence this time." He opened the folder, leafing through the pages with clinical precision. "Margaret was careful. These files are airtight. Once we release them, there's no turning back." "I don't want to turn back," I said firmly. "They've already gone after her family. They think they can erase her." "I won't let them," Dalton nodded once, then picked up his phone. "Then let's begin." The investigation moved faster than I imagined. Within weeks, regulators announced an official inquiry. Journalists swarmed the company's headquarters, demanding answers. Articles appeared daily, each more damning than the last. Words like fraudulent reporting and systemic misconduct spread across headlines. The company's shares plummeted, investors fled, and inside the firm, chaos reigned. Evelyn called me one evening, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and awe. "It's over, Lila. They've fired half the management team already. The board forced the CEO to resign this morning. HR is in meltdown. People are shredding documents in the hallways." I closed my eyes, gripping the phone tightly. It was happening. Margaret's revenge, careful, patient, inevitable, was unfolding in real time, but it wasn't just revenge. My clients thrived as the old company collapsed. Freed from the firm's rigid structures and hidden corruption, they embraced the strategies Arya and I built. Their businesses grew, their profits climbed, and their loyalty to me solidified into something unshakable. At night, I sat in my office, no longer just a single room above a bakery, but a growing space with new staff and new energy, and thought of Margaret. "They thought they could erase you," I whispered into the quiet. "But now, They'll remember your name every time they read the headlines. The final blow came 6 months after the investigation began. The firm released a desperate statement, announcing the dismissal of its entire senior management. The once proud company that had humiliated Margaret, that had mocked me, that had tried to crush us both, was now a husk, stripped of reputation, abandoned by clients, drowning in lawsuits. And I, the woman they had fired without ceremony, was still standing. Not just standing, thriving. When Arya and I toasted with cheap wine in the office one evening, she looked at me over the rim of her glass. You know, you didn't just save Margaret's legacy. You built your own. I smiled faintly, feeling both the weight of the past and the pull of the future. No, I said. We built it together. For the first time, I wasn't just Margaret's protégé. I wasn't a shadow or a survivor. I was the one holding the empire now, and I would never let it fall again.